Right. Good morning, everyone. I'm just still waiting on everybody to pop in here from the other session, and we still have about 2 minutes in case anybody wanted to take a quick break. In about 2 or 3 minutes, we'll get started. I'm just waiting on Suzanne to join us. Of course, with new technology, there's always like some little hiccups along the way. So we're just working through that. That's why I shut off my video so that you didn't have to watch my eyeballs going all over my screen because I know that's a bit distracting. So we are working on that, and then she will get started. As Maureen said, we're super excited to have Suzanne with us. I was initially going to do food safety, and then we reached out to her and she was willing, and I was like, yes, absolutely. Because any of you that know me, I'm not nearly as funny and interesting as Suzanne is. So I'm really excited that she was able to do this for us. Not to mention, this is what she does on a day-to-day basis, especially as Cuyahoga County is kind of set primarily in the red. We're on the color blocks if you're not from Ohio. It's set in the red and kind of teetered almost to purple a couple of times. She's been very busy at work trying to get everything sorted to help us get the kids back to school or do virtual learning or blend it, whatever we decide is the best moving forward. All right, so I hope that you are all excited for school. I know that this is probably not the year that we were all expecting, but I think that it is a learning process for all of us and a chance for us to try something new. Whether you've never served in the classroom, whether you've never, if you didn't do emergency feeding at the end of the pandemic feeding in March, April, and May, and you may be bringing kiddos back either full-time or part-time in some capacity, this is a chance for you to kind of exercise a new way of thinking about your menus. And again, today is full of ways that we are trying to provide you with as much information as we possibly can so that you're ready to go when and if you do go back to school, or if you're doing curbside pickup, you'll be ready for that information as well. We have some really, really great sessions coming up. And I think food safety is probably a huge concern for a lot of us. I know for me, when I walk through buildings, that's something that I'm always really keeping a close eye on to see what's going on. And now, especially because now we have this virus and we have to wash hands and we have to be wearing our facial coverings appropriately. And I know that was to try. And oh, there we go. Good morning. All right. Can one of you talk and we'll see if we can hear you? Make sure your sound is good. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. Health.
So we are good to go.
All right,
believe
whenever
I can
you're
hear you. Okay, I'm going to
ready.
share my screen, and so then you can see your slides and we'll get started.
We're hearing you kind of. Now we're hearing a little like in
A reverb.
double stereo, yeah. Some feed.
I'm trying to think what
It's all
would
better
be.
now.
Yeah, now we're good.
Okay, well, good morning. I think Sarah's
Yep, go ahead.
going to get our slides started for us, I believe. There we go. So, hello, everyone. Thank you. Good morning. Dante, could you hand me that? Thank you. Good morning. We listened to Maureen, and boy, Maureen, you are spot on. You said a couple of things that were really important, that we need to come from a spot of compassion and that we need to plan for the worst and hope for the best. And certainly in public health, we've been prepared for a pandemic for a long, long time. We've been preparing. We never could have imagined. In my 27 and a half years of public health, I never have seen anything like this. My partner, Kevin Brennan, he's our communications officer at the Board of Health. So he's not on the health inspection side, he's on the administration side. He's the guy who puts all the media out. And you can imagine we've been crazy busy. So what we wanted to talk with you about is our objectives for this session. Next slide, please. Our objectives for this session, there we go, almost, didn't quite go to the next slide. Okay, there we go. Our objectives are to talk with you about identifying the 3 types of kitchen hazards and define the best practices for food safety during a pandemic. So I'm going to let Kevin take the next slide.
And thanks for bearing with us. We're trying to work through some technical issues. Our Wi-Fi is not the best in our building, so we appreciate Sarah helping us out. So for the next slide, what we want to do is we want to create checks and balances, and these exist all across the facility. So we look at environmental services, we look at maintenance and repair, bringing in outside service techs to do things like dish machines and other regular maintenance duties. Cleaning schedule is really important, as is your temperature log, because as any of you who have seen us talk before, in the event of an outbreak, we want to make sure that you have a lot of records and you have a lot of information on hand, because that will certainly help us to make sure that everything's going right in your facility, help us narrow down what could be a potential source of contamination or problem in the facility. So the more records you keep, the better off you are.
And we talk a lot about all the quality assurance, and Maureen said an important thing when she was doing her intro. She said, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. And certainly in science, all of our nurses and all of our sanitarians would tell you that's true. If they didn't write it down, there was no inspection. So when we talk about all the things that we need in order to have a healthy and happy kitchen, we start with clean and sanitary equipment. Okay. So we're just going to forward slide. Okay, thank you. So when we see non-durable equipment like it's pictured here, where it's pitted, it's stained, it's no longer cleanable or durable, we want to make sure that you start phasing some of that out. And you guys in food protection say, well, yeah, that's easily said, Suzanne, but we don't always hold the purse strings. So you want to speak, because Kevin has many, many years in working for schools. Speak to administration and the collaboration between food service directors and principals, superintendents, et cetera.
Yeah, it could be a long road, right? For any of you who work in schools, you know it can be a very difficult train to get you from one office to another office to another office. So I think what really helps is the more succinct you can be in the descriptions of what you need, that's very helpful. And I think attaching dollar amounts or projections or estimates to things is really a big help, because when the information gets to the person at the building level, whether that's the principal, whether that can be the business manager for the entire district, right? The costs associated with what you're trying to do will be one of the first points of conversation. So we want to look at concept, we want to look at utility, right? What kind of added value is this suggestion or this renovation or this addition going to give us? And then an estimate of cost. I think those are the best things to get the conversation started.
All right, so for this next slide, what you can see is broken shards of plastic have fallen off. And this came from a complaint at one of my fast food businesses, where the customer actually had the little plastic piece, and I actually found the missing link. I found the piece that it attached to. So when you have things pitted and worn, or you have things broken, you want to prevent physical or chemical contamination. Because when food sits in plastic, a lot of bad things can happen, and we'll get to those in the next couple slides. Next slide, please.
All right, so this is a clothes closet or a coat closet, right, at a facility, and we have concerns things are sitting on the floor, everything's on top of each other. The thing is, too, if a lot of this stuff doesn't really get moved on a daily basis, the thing we worry about is pest harborage, right? Because as we know, things, bed bugs, roaches, all those different things like to bury themselves in dark places. So this is a prime opportunity for pest harborage. So we just want to make sure that you're paying attention to kind of the flow of where things go in your facility and making sure that things move forward. So if we go to the next slide, please. Okay, so again, we want to deter pests by removing scraps, paper, and grease to eliminate the food and the water source, right? There's grease trails on this floor, there's an empty box, there's a shoe, there's a garbage bag, and there's a broom that's very well worn that probably has a lot of juicy contaminants right in the tip of it. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to these things as well. So next slide, please.
When we start to look at equipment, we're going to look at things that are worn and pitted. And as you can see, this is a place where dishes go. This is a place where clean food contact surfaces touch. And Maureen and I goof around, and Sarah, when we talk on these calls, tell me something. Tell me a catchphrase, Suzanne. How can I make them? Would you lick it? That's the catchphrase, because you're putting glasses mouth down. You're putting silverware directly on somebody's dish trays. If you're not willing to lick this tray because it's filthy or it's pitted or it's gross, why are you expecting your customer to? And like Maureen said, these are restaurants you guys are running now. This is no more grab a snack and get going. These are full restaurants you guys control, and you have the ability to make someone sick if you don't do it right. Next slide, please. We sometimes talk about people-centered care, and one of the things we do in long-term care and hospitals and nursing homes that you schools have also bought into is making the child, making the teacher, making the administrator feel like they're at their house. And so what do they say to you? I'm getting my breakfast. I don't want some hard, frozen like a rock, refrigerated butter. It's going to tear my bread. Come on, Mrs. Thomas lunch lady, leave it spreadable, leave it out so it's nice and smushy and I can spread it out. But we find butter at TCS Foods sitting at 60, 70, 80 degrees. So that can be a problem. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So when we're receiving foods, right, it can be a difficult thing because sometimes you're so busy. You're trying to take care of a couple things. You got the person coming in the back door. You're trying to take the temperature of the stuff that comes in. We got to get it into the cooler. So there can be some overlap and also some oversight, unfortunately. So when we look at this situation here, when we took this picture, this was a delivery of eggs that came into a facility at about 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. And this picture was taken about 2 in the afternoon. So 5.5 hours, 60 dozen eggs sat on the floor with a big sign on the top on the carton that says must be kept under refrigeration. So for whatever reason, this didn't get refrigerated. Unfortunately, when we did this inspection, those 60 dozen eggs went in the trash because they had been in the danger zone for 5.5 hours. So we just want to encourage you to be as attentive as you can when receiving information. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so when using the slicer, we want to make sure that you're attuned to this new rule here, right? When using a slicing glove, a disposable non-latex glove must be worn over and under the slicing glove to prevent contamination of hands. So you can see that. You can see the layer closest to this person's skin is a non-latex glove. We see the mesh slicing glove, and then we see another non-latex glove over the top, right? We're trying to prevent the contamination of hands. And we want that to prevent contamination of the glove as well, right? We don't want that mesh slicing glove to become a place where food and things get trapped. Because a lot of times people hear people, oh, just rinse it under hot water, it'll be fine. Well, sometimes you got to scrub it and get the stuff out of it. So we got to make sure that we're being attentive to that.
Next slide, please. So when we look inside of a walk-in refrigerator, we see condensate like this. I've got sanitarian in here in the room with me, and Dante and I, we've done inspections together. Some of my other sands are on. I see Sarah Kevney, some other folks on. They know this can be a whole bunch of very technical, very problematic situations that could cause illness, both from chemical, with freon leaking, and with pathogenic, like something like Legionella that lives easily in that condensate line. So whenever we see food that's become contaminated, and the state has really hammered us on this, this was something where we saw it on the outside of the box and said, well, it was frozen. It probably didn't get on the food. It's okay to use. Open the box. No way. If you think for any reason refrigerant has leaked or ice from condensers in a freezer or refrigerator has leaked on food, consider it trash. It could very much get someone sick or injure them. Next slide, please. We have asked you guys to go to methods to rapidly cool and rapidly heat foods to make sure that they're safe. And so right here on the shelf, you see a chill stick, and this cool stick is awesome. You can freeze that stick and use it to cool along with an ice bath when you have a big hot cauldron of soup or sauce or gravy to do cooling. But the violation here is that that's going to touch a ready-to-eat food, so it should on a dirty boxes and containers that have been touched by many hands and sat in many dusty freezers and storerooms are on those shelves. So that's not something you and I would lick, right? We wouldn't go in and we wouldn't lick that shelf. So why are we allowing our customers to by transferring it from the ice line? Next slide, please. Okay. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Miscommunication here. All right. So we know there are 4 ways to do it. The 5th way is not to put it on a shelf 6 inches above the floor where people walk by and kick dirt and debris all over it, right? That's not number 5. Number 1 is under refrigeration, right? The typical way. And those of us that are old enough, we remember when our parents used to leave stuff on the shelf, right? Leave for work and then come home and then that pound of meat's thawed, right? Hopefully those are days gone by. Under cold running water. As part of the cooking process, right? Freezer to fryer, right? Very typical.
Although in schools, Santa partners will smack you if you say fryer. Freezer to baked. We don't do any frying. Sorry, Maureen, that was a misstep.
There we go. We're doing too much fast food here. And then the 4th is the microwave. You can thaw it in the microwave as long as you're going to immediately cook it, right? You don't want to thaw it in the microwave, put it back in the refrigerator. So as long as you're completing the cooking process. So please remember, 4 approved ways, this is not the 5th way.
So we're going to go through a couple slides rapid fire for you because we talk a lot about ice being used as food. So next slide, please, for us. I'm going to go through some of these kind of quick. This is a violation, even though these ice totes are used to house ice safely, because the butt of the one touches the mouth of the other and hands have been on the butt of it, there's a potential for contamination. Next slide. Whenever we see next slide, please. Whenever we see a sprayer that has black electrical tape on it or duct tape on it, it's something that's not durable and cleanable. It shouldn't be used for food contact or clean hands. Next slide, please. And when we talk about the dish line or any piece of equipment that abuts right up next to a wall, it either should be sealed to the wall or 4 inches away so somebody can get their hand down there to clean behind. Right now, with a silicone missing, we see bacteria and water and mold growing back there, and that'll be a pest harborage. This operation had many gnats. This was a school, had a lot of gnats flying around and kept saying, where are they coming from? Where are they coming from? There's enough organic matter. Think about this. Organic matter in the size of a raisin, if it was grease or some other food stuff that gnats liked, could support about the life of about 1,000 of those little teeny midges or flies. So it only takes a little bit to keep them going. Next slide, please.
All right, so this next slide, we're going to see the aftermath of a fire. We have a lot of instances where we go into places and we see cambros too close to a stove. We see electrical wires not hooked up right. We see people, using things indoors that they should not be using indoors. So unfortunately, we see the aftermath of a fire here, and we want to make sure that you're conscious of removing all your excess grease and food materials, right? Because we know with pests, we know with grease, we know with hood units, we have a lot of problems where grease can accumulate. In schools, you guys by and large do a fantastic job, but we want to make sure that this is part of your regular quality control and your regular internal audit that you're doing on your cleaning procedures.
Next slide, please. So on this one, we see the interior of a dish machine. And you might say, Suzanne, why would you take a picture of that when you're on inspection? But I'll tell you why. Because whether it's a high temp or low temp dish machine, when we see this much calcium deposit and buildup, it really doesn't matter. That arm sprayer that sprays out underneath is not going to be able to have nice open holes to spray either chemical or hot water to effectively sanitize. So deliming a machine like this and sanitizing it, frankly, again, the water that hits this goes on to things that go directly into a student's mouth or a teacher's mouth or your mouth, and we care about all of your protection. Next slide, please.
All right, so when we talk about cleaning ceilings and vents and other overhead surfaces, this is to prevent physical contamination of food during prep, to prevent it from falling on the dishes or during dishwashing. Next slide, please. All right, pans and utensils. Sometimes we have our favorite pan. We've cooked with that pan for years. We love the way it feels in our hand. It's the right weight. It flips just right, whatever, right? This one's ready for retirement though. When the coating starts to flake off, we have contaminant problems. So please make sure that, even though it's your favorite pan, try to go out and buy a duplicate of it, because this one is not fit for duty any longer.
And one of the things I'm going to jump in on, even for your home use, sometimes the coatings that are in these pans can be associated with killing pests. They're volatile organic compounds, and when they become aerosolized, birds have been known to die, and hamsters and gerbils, small furry creatures as well, die from the volatilization of that coating. So when you start to see them worn, certainly if it's killing pets, this is like the canary in the cave thing, right? If it's killing the animal, what can it be doing to the human? It's not a good idea.
All right, so here we see a classic dirty floor, right? We see French drains, floor drains, all these other openings. They have to be regularly cleaned, predominantly, to prevent pest harborage. You can see the amount of grease buildup on that floor. You can see all the residue under the drains. You can see the grease running through the holes in the drain. So this is really a place that's just been neglected that really needs some attention, but we just want to make sure you're paying attention to that.
And this facility actually told me we had no idea those drain covers came off. So when we talked in the beginning about working with your maintenance crew and team, that's really important. This is a best practice, on the other hand. This is where refrigeration was freezing up, and the maintenance director came into this facility and said, hey, I've got a great idea. We've got too much restriction to airflow because the freezer's overcrowded. We're going to find you some more space, and then we're going to create airflow by using some PVC pipes. So it's a best practice. Next slide. Another best practice would be if you need to keep tongs that you use in a cleanable, durable spot up out of the way, and you're constantly going in and out of your freezer, you just put a hook right inside the freezer. We saw this at a food operation. Great idea to keep those tongs clean and safe. Next slide.
All right, so we see a pot of soup here come to a boil at 184, right, instead of 212. How do we do that? Is it like magic? No, it's not like magic. To cook, no, the more fat you add to it, right, the quicker you can get it to a rolling boil. The concern we have here is you could get a rolling boil going at what, Suzanne, 90 degrees
90
probably?
degrees, just keep adding soup base, more fat, lower the boiling temp.
But the problem with that is once you add the chicken is not being cooked thoroughly at 90 degrees, right? So we want to make sure that whatever temperature that food and that other materials that you're adding to your soup, whatever the proper cooking temperature is for them, you want to make sure your boiling water at least gets to that.
And so this was a clear broth, and I felt okay about using a laser thermometer to temp it. But as I talked to the operator, he said, no, there's some chunks of raw vegetables, there's some chunks of raw meat in the bottom. So we stirred up from the bottom, and I actually stabbed with my thermometer the thickest part, because certainly the clear liquid is going to transfer heat much more quickly than the thick viscous liquid. Next slide, please. To that end, let's say I'm doing something like caramelizing onions, like in the picture you're about to see. I don't want to stir and stir and stir to cool this product, because I'll break down the onions and they won't look like that nice caramelized shards of onion that I want to be on somebody's sandwich. So instead, an ice bath with a shallow pan to submerge the onions. So the big pot onions got put into 3 or 4 small shallow pans surrounded by ice, and the person temped them and made sure they hit that magic 70 degrees within 2 hours.
So you don't want people wondering whether it's onions or sauerkraut, Suzanne.
That's it. That's it, because it'll look all smashed. And a lot of
Exactly.
what the Sonic Partners does better than any of the other partners we work with, I'll tell you, is they worry about the appearance, especially with those kids. Those kids will scrutinize you guys like you're Chez Paul at the, Chez Paris. They want that food to look perfect. If there's a touch of pink in that burger, it's coming back, right? That lunch lady's going to have to hear about it. So obviously we want to make sure that that food quality is appealing as well.
All right, so when we talk about cooling food, as you're seeing here, this is actually a very deep pan of thick, viscous soup, okay? Several pans were brought into this cooler overnight, and then Suzanne came to the facility the next day, and when she got there, she took the temperature, and what, Suzanne, approximately 20 hours or so?
20 hours
after
later.
this was first inserted into the cooler. If you can read it, the temperature on that thermometer reads 161. So this was just like putting a little mini fire in the cooler, because then once we started temping other things, 75, 80 degrees. So this was like a fire sort of that just warmed the whole cooler. And obviously this all had to be thrown away. So this is an enormous amount of time and effort and resources wasted. So we want to make sure that you're cooling properly.
And so this unit, it not only ruined the 6 or 7 huge pans, this was a tilt skillet full product that was put way too close to the time they left into deep pans. And all that heat heated everything. The entire walk-in had to be discarded, about $7,000 worth of food. And they just couldn't believe that the worker that worked that afternoon made that mistake. But lesson learned, they had no food to make for school. They actually had to order pizzas last minute. So that can be an emergency. Next slide.
All right, so this is a best practice, right? Dented cans, we certainly don't want to be opening them. We have a concern with botulism. So, I think we might have gone out of order. That's all right. That's okay.
We'll flip to
We'll
that
get
slide.
back on
No
track.
worries.
That's all right. So what we see here is we see a rack for a salad bar, and these are the holders for the dressing. Great idea, terrible design, right? We know an engineer designed this, not a food safety expert, because the bottoms of those containers of dressing are probably within proper temperature, right? Around 40 degrees or so. The tops could be in the 50s, the 60s. They've been handled so many times. Every time they get tipped over, that warm spot that's near the top where the dressing comes out starts to form a film, and then that mixes with the cold from the bottom, and eventually we have this mixture of temperature. And so we really have a problem with this. So the right idea, just not the right execution with this particular unit.
Next slide, please. So there's our dented cans. So bulging or dented cans being segregated so that the operator can pick them up. Remember, this is more than just aesthetic. We worry about Clostridium botulinum that could kill someone, with microscopic holes that allow oxygen in and pathogen inside that anaerobic environment. And there's no competing organisms, because when you sealed the can, all the good bacteria, all the spoilage bacteria that can fight off something like botulism got killed off. So getting rid of bulging or dented cans is important. Next slide, please. All right, so the tops of the dish machine, we're going to go through a couple slides here. This is a little nook and cranny near a pellet style dish machine, a chemical sanitizer, and you can see all the buildup that's on top of it. Next slide. And here is the difference between a clean and a dirty dish rack. Where do you want your kids putting their mouth, right? Where do you want the things, the utensils that are going to go into their mouth, the food contact surface? So obviously it's time for repairs. And like Kevin said, you may have to be part of the budget process. We know that whole wings get added to schools with no money accounted for extra personnel or extra equipment in schools. So you need to elbow your way up to the table. Masonic Partners can help with that. Your local Board of Health can help with that. You have to have the supplies you need for the kids you serve. Next slide, please. Just a bunch of little nooks and crannies. The floor, I'm sorry, not the floor wall junction, but the equipment wall junction. There's a lot of mold there because that pipe behind the fixture, which in this case is a dish machine, wasn't buried in the wall. There's a pinch point there with a lot of bacteria. Next slide, please. This is a different type of scenario, a different type of machine. I can see the liquid sanitizer going through. This one happened to be a quat sanitizer. And again, just a lot of buildup back there, not a best practice. But we'll show you some best practices. Next slide. Go ahead, Kev.
All right, so this is a cool use of a plastic shoe tree that you can get at a discount store. The reason we love this is because we want employee drinks all collected in one place. We don't want them in various ice baths, coolers, locations, prep tables. We don't want them to be anywhere where they could possibly be contaminated or provide contamination to other things. So this is a great, we love this. This is a low-cost solution to what can be a problem depending on the number of employees you have in your facility.
It also deters pests from getting in the beverages of your employees. Next slide, please.
All right, so we're back to a dish machine temporarily here, but we see a leaky dish machine can be really tempting to pests, right? So that standing water and that grease up along the wall, or the dirt up along the wall rather, we want to make sure that we're looking after that.
Next slide, please. So speaking of pests, on the outside of your building, when you have employees who decide to dump greasy water or dump things over the edge, like, hey, we mopped this area, and instead of pouring it in the utility sink because it's heavy and we don't want to lift it, we'll just dump it outside. I had a mayor call me. This is actually behind a commercial food service, not a school. He called me and said, why are there rats running behind such and such facility? And I'm like, I don't know. And I'm looking at the dumpster, and then I turn around. It's all that greasy water was an attractant for pests, and I could actually see track marks from rodents right there in the grease. That, by the way, can be punishable by a fine from the Ohio EPA because you are contaminating groundwater if your gray water or black water ends up in the storm system. So definitely want to maintain that through a sanitary sewer. Next slide, please.
All right, so this is a new rule that was put into place, and this is a result of somebody much smarter than me coming up with a great idea to come up with detachable scissors. This is fantastic. You can entirely wash each handle of the scissors, right, and the blades. So we want to make sure that we don't have pinch points, because you remember scissors, can openers from back in the day, they had all this residue and rust because we weren't able to get in there and clean. So this is a great idea, but this is a new rule. So make sure that as you're restocking your supplies, you're getting detachable scissors. All right, next slide, please. And this is a best practice. We showed you the slicing glove and the ruling on the best practice for slicers. This is something that we really love to see. In some facilities, we have seen plastic garbage bags over equipment, and that is an absolute no-no. Those big garbage bags are lined with pesticide to keep pests away. This is the proper presentation. This slicer was completely cleaned, dried, or it's completely cleaned and sanitized rather, and then covered with clear plastic.
Next slide, please. So here we see the waste drain on a food prep sink, and it is what's called a submerged inlet, which is not good. Originally, there was a little funnel, and this waste drain sat above the funnel about 4 or 5 inches up above so that you could actually see the water running out. But the maintenance director at this school decided that it was splashing too much onto the floor, so he fixed it, and you see my quote fingers, by adding a pipe, an extension that was a submerged inlet that goes down into it penetrates the flood level ramp. So that means sewer gas and bacteria are backing back up into the sink where we're preparing food. It's not something you can see, smell, or taste because it's pathogenic, but it is a bad premise. So there has to be an air gap there. Next slide, please. Okay. So we've had a lot of questions from operators when we're doing inspections about what is a TCS, or time and temperature controlled for safety food, and what is not. In general, if it's a food that you make from scratch that is of animal or vegetable origin, once you cooked it, in general, it is a TCS food. But there is an actual category for other foods that you could have tested, but they have to be homogeneous. Things like already prepared mayonnaise or already prepared barbecue sauce. Now, if it's commercially processed, that food should come with a label on it that tells you refrigerate after opening, keep refrigerated, something like that that tells you it's TCS. By the way, if the product says for best quality, that just means so like the mayonnaise or salad dressing doesn't separate. It doesn't mean it's a TCS product because it's for quality reasons only. If you wanted to have your own products that you test, for example, let's say you have a big school system, you have a big, huge kitchen, and you have 6 or 7 satellite schools, and you're making your own barbecue sauce. And you know by nature of your experience that you're adding enough vinegar or lemon juice or acid that you think it's non-TCS. You would have to have samples of the product tested, and it would have to meet these guidelines for water activity and for pH in order to not be a time and temperature control, to be able to be set out at room temperature. In the meantime, until that testing is done and your local board of health can help you with labs in your area that could do the testing, you have to keep it refrigerated. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's say that there's a board meeting for your school board that suddenly crops up, and all of a sudden your superintendent comes to you and says, hey, Director of Dining Services, I've got a dilemma. I need a meal by such and such time. And you're like, great, I guess I'm doing some more unpaid overtime. Woohoo! That's what happens. And we have to set up a buffet line, make a tray line, use some ice, cut leafy greens, cut tomatoes, cut melons, and raw seed sprouts are 4 categories of raw produce that are TCS food. If they're put out just like meat, chicken, cheese, fish, they have to be held at or below 41. However, if you know that this is a temporary thing, it's one quick meal, you can use what's called time as a public health control. We like to call it TILT, time in lieu of temperature. So instead of using 41 degrees or lesser, you use time. You have 4 hours to timestamp that product, and it can be discarded after the 4 hours. But in order to use this methodology, your license for your business has to be a risk class 4, and you have to have had a written policy that you submitted to your board of health. I'll tell you though, that policy can be one simple line. It could say something like TCS foods held using time as a public health control will be time-stamped for a 4-hour discard and then thrown away. Easy peasy, one sentence, exactly what you're gonna do. So next slide, please.
All right, so wherever you have a hose permanently attached to a sink, please have your registered plumber install a backflow preventer to protect the potable water supply, right? Just as it says in the notes there. Again, I think in school districts, we have, the business office will usually take care of all your repairs. If they need to, they'll bring in somebody from the outside. So you usually don't have too many problems with having somebody who's registered or licensed. But just, general knowledge for those of you, make sure that you're getting the right person to do the right job. No, well, Joe was a plumber and he's retired, but he can volunteer and come up and do that, right? I know those things don't typically happen in schools. They happen more in regular restaurant environments, but just as an aside, making sure that you're getting the right person to do the right job. Much like the dish machine, right? Those pictures we showed you of the dish machine. Have the contractor come in and do the work for you so that it's done correctly and you have assurance that it's done right. Next slide, please. All right, so the bane of our existence in public health is hand washing. We cannot tell you enough, wash your hands, right? We know, if any of you have heard us before, we say 80 to 90% of communicable disease can be prevented if we all washed our hands correctly. This is a terrible example of hygienic practice because what we need is a soap dispenser here. We can't have everybody coming in with dirty hands and handling the same bag of soap and picking it up and then pouring it in their hands and then turning on the faucets and touching everything, right? So this is right idea, bad execution. Next slide, please. All right, this is great. This makes Suzanne's heart warm as a food program manager, right? Oh, I'm sorry, I missed. Well, all right, this is a great example. This is fine. This is TCS food stored overnight, but it's date marked, right? And these are, I believe, cut melons, Suzanne, right? Tomatoes, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. So as Suzanne said, cut tomatoes are one of those TCS foods, right? So we love this. It's in the cooler, it's on a clean shelf, it's covered, and it's date marked.
Next slide, please. So how we store TCS products, like in this case, we have some food cooling on a shallow pan, and it already was cooled to room temperature 70 before it was placed in the cooler. It's cooled down to 41. And then as you can see, it can be stacked in a deeper container after it's cool and date marked. And that's a great practice as far as cooling. Next slide, please. So for this slide, we see refrigerator, and down at the bottom of it, we have employees' food stored separate and below customer food, and that's the perfect way to do it. That's a best practice. We know you sometimes don't have, I know in the teacher's lounge, they might have a refrigerator for the teachers, but the food employees might not have a place. Designated place below and separate from the customer food, and you should be on. Next slide, please.
All right, so we're back to pests, right? I've talked about this a couple times before. You see this plastic pheromone pest deterrent, right, hanging from a pipe there? Those are not approved for use indoors. The reason being is they contain toxins that are poisonous to humans, right? So if anybody ever got their fingers inside of it, if it ever leaked onto food, if it ever got onto a surface, it could be very dangerous. So these are meant for outdoor use only. So please do not use these indoors.
And we do have a lot of commercial pest control operators, for whatever reason, hanging them in schools. So watch for that. So this next slide happens to show a best practice. This is an ice machine that is being recharged with Freon, and the lines are being blown out to remove mold and bacteria from inside the unit. If you've never seen this done on your unit, for shame, get a refrigeration specialist in there. If you aren't aware of one in your area, if you need door gaskets and you're not aware who can replace them, or light shields, if there's outside companies needed, always ask your public health sanitarian, and they can refer you to a few companies. We don't get any kind of crazy kickbacks from them. We just know several companies that come highly recommended. Also, your building department can help you with those references. But servicing machines and maintenance on machines is much less expensive than repair or replacement of machines.
And this is an extension, you guys, of that philosophy about, the dish carrier, right, with the glasses. Would you lick it? These lines are full of mold, right, after it accumulates for a while. So you want to make sure that you're attentive to them on a regular basis. All right, so earlier, next slide, please. I don't mean to be confusing, Sarah. Sorry. All right, so here, we talked about fire earlier, and this is the example I gave, right? This is a Cambro way too close to an open flame. We see evidence of, obviously, fire damage on the Cambro, on the shelf, on the burners. So this is an absolute no-no. Make sure that you're not doing this. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a best practice. What we see here, we see raw meat thawed and separated by species and below other foods to prevent contamination. This is great. We love to see this. We want to make sure that you're paying attention to the idea of making sure that we don't cross-contaminate, we don't cross-contact with allergens. So this is really something that we love to see. Next slide, please.
All right, so in this case, Maureen spoke to this, that our schools had to work like crazy, running around, people that were just so frantic back in the spring when all of a sudden school was going to be closed down. They had to find things to do with food. They had to be ingenious. This is a kitchen that got very creative with their reheating when one of their combi ovens went down, and they had no way to reheat bulk portions of food. They used 6 pans and fryers and just set them down in there and stirred the product like crazy, and boom, they could reheat the product in just a few minutes. Next slide, please. When we ask you about equipment and we talk about things durability and cleanability, we have a couple slides that are no-nos. Here's a picture of a spatula that's clearly worn and pitted. I had to argue with this operator to get rid of this. This is like her lucky spatula. Unfortunately, take that home and hang it on the wall, but don't use it in a commercial kitchen like school. So next slide, please.
I think she's the same one that had that pan we saw earlier.
Exactly.
Right? The pan and the spatula kind of go together.
Exactly.
Right? It's hard to let them go.
Yeah.
All right, so here we see an example of a surface that is neither cleanable nor durable. This is a wood panel affixed to a metal fixture, right? This is something that we never want to see. It presents a lot of problems being wood. Next slide, please.
So we thought we would talk with you about the new life after COVID. And we know some of your schools will be opening on the recommendations of your boards of health, or some of you won't be opening, or some of you will be opening in a hybrid setting. So we're going to be asking our food workers to do a lot of different things relative to COVID. And one of the things we want to review are these 5 basic tenets of COVID prevention. The hand hygiene Kevin spoke to earlier, the disinfection of high-touch surfaces, the social distancing, the wearing of facial coverings, and of course the health screenings. Those 5 things, no matter what kind of business, if you're a mattress store, if you're a school, doesn't matter. Any business, a shoe store, we want to make sure that those 5 tenants help protect all of us in the community. And you are caring for some of our most precious cargo with caring for our kids.
So we're seeing a water fountain. You guys know how problematic these can be in good times, right? When we worry about just things like flu and cold and norovirus. Now in times of COVID, we have to be extra vigilant. So this is something that we would be putting yellow tape on or a cover over to make sure that people don't use it, because just people getting their mouths and hands on this unit is just problematic in a lot of ways. All right, next slide, please. So here we see an example of a cleaner without a label, right? This is a potential source of chemical contamination. If we don't know what's in that bottle, how do we know what we should be spraying it on? How do we know if we should be wearing gloves? We don't really know anything about it, right? There might be one person who knows, hey, this is the yellow thing is so-and-so. Well, but that person's off today, right? So we can't find out what's the yellow liquid inside the bottle. So just make sure, because also we want to make sure that we're using the right thing to clean and disinfect high-touch surfaces, because that needs to be done on a regular basis. So given that this was a cleaner that's clearly labeled, we would love it because we could use it on the table here. We could use it on different surfaces in this environment.
Next slide, please. All right, so in this slide, we talk about staying home when we are sick, and we mean a lot more than just sick with COVID symptoms, right? There's the usual, thank you. We need the usual diarrhea, vomiting, sore throat with fever, jaundice where your skin or eyes look yellow, or open lesions on the skin. Any of those things could be communicable diseases other than COVID, and we still care about those. We don't want to forget about enteric illnesses, things that cause all these problems in school, like norovirus and salmonella and shigella. But of course, the COVID symptoms that we're adding to those, and there could be a bunch of those COVID symptoms, right? Shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, a dry cough, a fever over 104 degrees, 100.4, 104, we have way bigger problems, 100.4, sorry, misspoke. And of course, loss of taste and smell. Those are all common symptoms. And the problem is going to be every single thing we hear and see out of a school or a school child or an administrator is going to look like COVID to us, right? Symptoms are so broad. So we're going to work closely with school nurses. And if you need additional help, call the Board of Health. Next slide, please.
Right, but it's
Hey guys, I'm jumping in. I know that the team at the Board of Health has frozen. I'm going to ask Sarah to jump back on with me here, and we will continue their slides. They did share them with us, and if they get back live, we'll give back the stage to them. So obviously, when we started this entire presentation, we started with a great set of reminders, and I think that's awesome to think about. We're so focused on COVID. I'm hopeful that we are all looking at our standard operating procedures, and that those procedures are all written into a HACCP plan. And what we're asking for you to consider is for us to be able to add some COVID callouts into your operational plans. And I know for a fact, Suzanne is one of my favorite colleagues. She's always going to talk about all things continuing to keep everyone safe, given all of the Serve Safe we've all taken and food safety we've taken. I think it's really important and obviously clutch that they came in to be able to talk to us today about just reminding about all of the good practices we already have in place. I'm going to let Sarah jump in and jump into our slides to kind of wrap up this session. And again, if we can get Susan and her friend back, my friend, we would love to have them back, but we're going to have Sarah go ahead and switch over to some COVID considerations.
All right. So I'm going to share this screen over here. Let me get this go in here. So these are just some things as I was thinking about back to school and sending training out to the ladies and gentlemen that I work with, the things that I'm really focused on, and especially because we primarily work with schools. So I think one of the biggest changes for us is going to be the facial coverings. It's going to be constant usage of disposable gloves. Social distancing is going to be huge. I do have elementary buildings that are small, and when we're in the kitchens, it is going to be difficult to keep that social distance. So thinking through what that looks like. And then obviously meals to go. I think that that's becoming more important as we get closer and closer to school starting, and we're seeing more schools pick a virtual option. So just as a little refresher, like they said, hand washing. So when do we need to do it? We want to encourage staff to be washing them promptly when they enter the building, because we don't want to bring any germs that you might have brought from home into the building. Then we want to make sure that we're doing that for at least 20 seconds with soap and warm water, right? And really vigorously scrubbing our hands, getting in between them, nails, if you have nails, really thinking through that, and then drying your hands appropriately as well. So that's going to be really important to make sure that happens immediately upon arrival to the building. I know sometimes in the morning we kind of get things going and then we stop to wash hands and get ready, but we want to go ahead and make sure that we're doing that right away. The disposable glove usage. So a lot of times, if you've been in school food service a long time, you have been allowed, so long as your hands are properly washed, you are allowed to touch frozen food before it goes into the oven without gloved hands. Moving forward, because of all things COVID and trying to be very sensitive to making sure we're not spreading that virus, we want to make sure that we're wearing disposable gloves at all times and that we are really being cognizant about our hands. I know that if you're one of my buildings, I harp on hand washing and glove usage quite a lot. I think people get sick of hearing it, but it's important, and this more so than ever, because this is a big way that we could spread the virus. We just have to be conscientious of that. So of course, at Sonic, we're always saying mission possible, right? So this is a chance for us in the back of the house to make the school meal an extension of the classroom and do teaching. Who would have thought in 2020, we laugh when we think of movies from the 80s and they thought we'd all be driving around in flying cars. And here we are going over how to hand wash and wear facial coverings properly. But that is where we're at, and we're going to move forward. So classroom feeding, a lot of us are doing this model this year. So again, the importance is going to be keeping hot food hot and cold food cold. So keeping hot food 135 or higher and keeping cold food at 41 or lower. Again, as Suzanne mentioned, you can use tilt. So I know for my districts, we don't have a ton of extra money to buy fancy equipment, especially hopefully this is only going to last maybe the first part of the school year, maybe this school year, hopefully the 2021-2022 school year, things will go back to the old normal and we won't need this equipment. So there isn't a justifiable reason to put a lot of money into those things. So you can use time in lieu of temperature in order to get those cold and hot foods to the classroom without having to purchase equipment. Again, we're going to want to make sure things are wrapped and covered so that there is no potential for contamination as we are traveling from the cafeteria or prep space to the classrooms. Please make sure that you are updating your HACCP plan to reflect your new meal serving. So if you've typically served in the classroom, which for most of us, unless you're doing breakfast in the classroom, that isn't the case. We tend to feed kids in the cafeteria space. You will need to write down what is your procedure. How are you keeping food hot? How are you keeping food cold? How are you keeping it safe in transport? How are you serving it to the kids? Those are all things that you need to write and submit that to your local health department so that they know that you have a good solid plan into place before they come into your building and do a review on that. Meals home, again, I think a lot of us, if you're doing all virtual learning or blended, we are going to probably be doing some sort of curbside pickup for meals. So how do we keep those safe? Again, I harp on this a lot, hot food hot, 135 or higher, cold food cold, 41 or lower, and making sure that we are keeping food at the adequate temperature. Because again, we don't want to make the kids sick with foodborne illness, right? So we keep them safe and they don't get this crazy virus that's going around, but then we give them foodborne illness. So let's not do that and make sure that we have all of our P's and Q's in place so that we're ready to go. Again, just making sure that things are covered if that's possible. And we are strategizing teams A and team B. If you are sending food home and you have kids on site, so you're doing that blended learning situation, having a team A that's prepping food for the kids that are on site, having a team B in a different spot making the food to go home. So then again, we're able to kind of social distance and get those foods prepped and take as much food safety as possible throughout that process. So there are some obviously new food safety standards going on with all things COVID. As we were talking about, masks are going to be a big part of that. So it's not just wearing the mask, but that you are properly wearing that mask. So this is a little pictorial. I think that this is something that would be important to print and hang up in your back of the house, because again, we weren't wearing face coverings last school year when we started. So this may be new. And I think as I go out into public, I notice that a lot of people are wearing these, but not wearing them correctly. So again, it's really important that if we're going to have our staff wear these, that they are putting them on and off appropriately. Again, with some updated protocol, those single-use disposable gloves should be worn at all times, okay? You really, really need to make sure that your hands are covered. We really need to make sure that we are frequently washing hands. I tell everybody that your hands should be washed a lot when you are in the kitchen working. So now more than ever, please, if in doubt, stop and wash your hands, okay? And making sure that you're doing staff health checks daily and keeping a log of that. Again, as Maureen and Suzanne said earlier, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So making sure that you're taking temperatures, making sure if anybody has any symptoms that you're writing those down, whether you assign a safety officer, if that's the person in charge of the building, or whoever is going to check people in the morning, to make sure that we are asking those questions and that we are getting prepped and ready for the day. And then just again, making sure that you have those enhanced cleaning logs ready to go. So some COVID considerations, meal service protocol. So classroom feeding, what does that look like? Keeping that social distance. Cafeteria model, are you putting little feet or your school logo on the floor so the kids know what 6 feet distance looks like and where to stand? And then doing video walkthroughs. So it's as simple as a lot of us post to a school's Facebook page or Instagram, taking a short little 2 or 3 minute video, doing a walkthrough of what the kitchen looks like. I think that we all want our kids to come through and feel safe eating with us. So if they are coming back in the building, and I think that this would be reassuring to both parents and students that we are doing our due diligence to keep the kids safe. And that's going to be important for participation. Making sure you have plexiglass, again, just for safety reasons, keeping your staff safe as well as the kids. I know that that's probably a bad rush to order all of that stuff because I think everybody wants it. Supply and demand is an interesting situation, but just making sure that you are ready. Something else to think about is wrapped cutlery and PC condiments. So how are you going to be serving those to the kid? Again, just thinking about touching things the least amount of times possible, right? And then cashless POS. We actually do have a session from 11 to 11:30 if you are interested in joining that. Tina Hastings will be talking about some options with that as well. So it looks like our Board of Health friends are back. So I am going to hand it back over to them and let them finish their presentation.
Thank you. We're sorry about the little Wi-Fi difficulty there if we have so many users on with our COVID response. So we talked about lunch looking very different in actually,
yes, we're getting there.
you were getting there. Sarah, it was a perfect
segue.
Some of the slides, you know, you skipped over some. Obviously for us, that's perfect. Where you're at is perfect for us. Food may need to be delivered to go boxes, containers. We talked about that. And temperature control could be challenging. We know that schools are being asked to do a lot of different things. And in doing so, sometimes quality assurance can go out the window. So it's going to be important to have those test trays that Maureen always talks about, writing it down, documenting to make sure the food is safe. Another important thing would be foods grabbed, next slide, if you can get the next slide up, foods grabbed by students. You know, in the past, these trays, these boats could slide down and you could have those baked tater tots or those baked fries, baked whatever, open. As Sarah was saying very eloquently, no more open products, individual single service. And some of you might be saying, but we've got this island of a to-go station where little solo cups are there and the kids get their own ketchup, the kids pump their own mustard. What do we do about that? Take those dispensers and either put them behind the line and you hand it to the kids in the open container, or have an attendant stand by that island, and the attendant with clean, sanitized, gloved hands touching those fixtures to knock down those high-touch surfaces. It's not realistic to have someone patrolling and constantly sanitizing. It's going to happen hourly, at the very most, maybe 2 hours. The next slide, we see some open buffet style salads and greens, which Pasonic and we love to see that fresh produce, right? Everything healthy there. But in this case, with the pandemic, we don't want open foods that can be coughed or sneezed on. Next slide. And we didn't get too down and dirty because we knew all our Pasonic partners would be. But on this next slide, you see a bunch of cafeteria staff workers. Now, tell me, when we were looking for these slides and we grabbed some pictures we had, look at all these people not social distancing and not wearing masks. This is the typical how a kitchen would really learn in real life before pandemic, but it looks so odd to us. Have you caught yourself doing that? You're watching a commercial going, they shouldn't be standing so close. But clearly the commercial was made before the pandemic. We can reinforce all these items to you over and over again. We're always here for you as a Board of Health. We're here to answer your questions. Your local Board of Health, wherever you are in the United States, they're there for you. If they're not, you call us at 216-201-2000. Yes, Ohio is in the Eastern time zone. Call us and we'll answer questions. And my partner, who's my hand hygiene guru, is going to take you home on this last slide.
Yeah, one more time for hand hygiene. So, right, this is a meme that we saw, and wash your hands like you just got done slicing jalapenos for a batch of nachos, and you need to take your contacts out, right? That's washing your hands with a fervor. You want all that stuff off of you as soon as you can get it off of you. So this is a good reminder. So again, thank you all for your attention. We really appreciate the time, the opportunity to get out in front of you and offer some information. If you have questions about COVID, please make sure that you're getting in touch with your respective local Department of Health. The information, in some instances, it's no exaggeration to say the information is changing by the hour. It is certainly changing by the day. So please make sure that you're staying in touch. You're doing all you can. CDC.gov, coronavirusohio.gov, and ccbh.net/coronavirus. Probably three of the best sources you can get for timely information.
And on that coronavirus.ohio.gov are the Dine Safe Ohio orders, as well as the revised, which came out on the 5th of, or actually on the 3rd, I'm sorry, a couple days ago, came out on the 3rd of August. So the latest revision. So Dine Safe Ohio is the guidance that all restaurants, including school kitchens, should be following. And Maureen, if anyone has a question for us, we'll be happy to answer it now or after the session, whichever you prefer.
Awesome. So first of all, it's so great to see your face. I miss you guys. I know. I just want to thank you guys for being the rock stars you are and holding down the county which we live in and send our kids to school in. And this has been, again, talking about showing grace to others. Just thank you for your service. This has been just unprecedented and crazy. And I know we said we weren't going to say that a lot today, but I can't say it without seeing you. Thank you. I know you've been not sleeping and did this presentation on the fly for me. I called the bat phone. I told my staff, like, I only call her when I really need her. And she called me. So, the questions we have here.
I saw that spatula in the sky, right? Yeah. I saw that spatula in the sky. I'm like, oh no.
So, we have some questions in the chat. We will field those questions. I don't think we have a ton of time, but I think the best plan that we've been telling folks is communication is key. If they come up with their COVID action plans, speak to their specific sanitarians who will, in fact, be doing their inspections and really asking for guidance and asking for permission, not forgiveness, is important here, because forgiveness is going to be tricky, right? So being proactive, submitting those plans, anything else as a last minute takeaway. Can you just repeat the 5 pillars of COVID action steps? And then we just love you guys and thank you for your time. So.
Sure. So facial coverings. Another is hand hygiene. Another would be social distancing. Another would be making sure that you're cleaning and disinfecting commonly touched surfaces. And then the 5th is health screenings. So making sure that those are either done at home, and we really like the fact that they're done at home, because if you're ill, you don't need to come to work and tell them that you're in person, or you're ill in person, right? You can call them. So those are the 5 tenets we really want everybody to hold fast to, because in the absence of a vaccine or antivirals or anything else, these are the mechanisms that provide us the best defense.
Amen. And so we're asking for folks to get their credit by you posing a question and them answering in the session chat. So Suzanne, give them a zinger. What's your question? Anything fun, serious, whatever.
Okay. All right. So at times food has to be held without refrigeration, whether it's because we're serving remote, whether we're serving in a classroom, whether we're doing grab and go lunch style because we're still feeding our kids that are under resourced that need to pick up food. We have a time frame and we have a special method of holding food without refrigeration that requires either how long in hours that's legal. You can tell us what has to be done to the food, and you can tell us the name of that plan and or what's required. There's 2 requirements to do that plan. So we'd be interested to see if you could answer any of those.
I love it. And as you all
right.
know, again, Team Pasonic is in constant communication with the Board of Health. We have created a COVID template for you. Again, we started this day by saying we're going to give you your GPS, your great planning strategies. We have a document that we have key points that you can add to your existing HACCP plans. The importance is to take those off the shelf, dust them off, and put in some COVID action steps. Furthermore, training your folks. Again, we said your people and the passengers in the back seat, you don't want your staff saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Yes, we are there. And here's our plan. Here's our supports. We care about you being healthy. And then last but not least, I know Sarah jumped on with some slides. We do have a Pasonic kind of extension to this. So if you are interested in an additional training around food safety, we're your girls and we will be there for you. I feel like you can't train enough, specifically as we know that we're going to have substitute workers. We'll have sometimes aides and teachers supporting the process in our classroom feeding situations. So train, and train again. We will have copies of our slides available, and certainly I know that the Board of Health, again, is a great resource. Please type your answers into the session chat. So click chat and session, and Suzanne's posed you a question. If you aren't keeping that food under refrigeration, what type of a procedure will you use? And if you don't know, go back to NutriSmartNetwork.com, COVID resources. We have a sneaky video that will give you the right answer if you don't know it. Again, thank you to our partners in crime and in passion and in health at the Board of Health. Kevin and Suzanne, I love you both. Thank you for your time today. Don't forget, folks, you have to jump out of this session and you'll be able to visit the stage, and then you'll be able to jump into your next choice of session. So there'll be 3 choices. One will be, again, touchless. So Tina's going to walk you through, again, some more food safety and all over safety and getting kids through the line. We will also have a session on Healthy Pro with pre-ordering, which I think is important and on everybody's mind. And last but not least, equity and civil rights. Guys, we love you. We'll see you in the next session. Thanks.